The machine that lays at the heart of this installation is it's really about trying to give presence to the broader machine of machine learning. So thinking about what happens when we unveil that machine. And of course, the machine that I'm talking about isn't one simple machine, but of course the kind of wider system of computational image making that I'm trying to explore. Because it's the idea that, it images itself, and what happens when it's fed back into the machine, it gives us this kind of image that just starts to fall apart. What I wanted to do through this work was really kind of bring together the many processes that contribute to that machine. And that's right from the extractive processes used in the mining tools, that sort of takes the raw materials needed to fuel these technologies, and also the mining associated with data mining as well, and the sort of scraping of information. So I wanted to build this machine that felt like this actually quite aggressive tool that becomes this sort of hybrid, almost like a monster that brings all of these processes together. When I was proposing to make this project, which is now titled Variations, I had just completed a really big body of work that was really interrogating computer-generated architectural propositions. As my practice had developed from interrogating kind of photographic techniques or things that could be described as photographic that don't use a camera, it felt like the kind of most logical technology to start to investigate next. One of the things about sort of generative AI and the way that we're sort of presented with images as outputs, sort of text to image, often we're given kind of 4 choices. I sort of thought about how one might apply that to a curatorial process and think, well, rather than making this kind of project that might tour from space to space, maybe this is something that could be a variation on itself. From the initial AI-generated images that this piece responds to, there were these kind of strange sort of mining heads that were kind of all over the machine. So I wanted to kind of recreate that. But of course, a lot of these materials that I'm using, it's all about mimicry, and in many ways, it's a kind of staging. It's kind of recognizing its context as something that is kind of producing images. It's a photographic set. So in many ways, I'm trying to kind of create these things that are stand-ins, that are kind of the object but not the object, and there are these kind of slippages that they create. This exhibition is the second variation in this project, and it's titled V2, so variation number 2, Rigged. And this is really a follow-on from, I suppose, the findings from the first variation, Content Aware. I wasn't sure how people would respond to the security camera on there or whether they'd even notice it. And it was interesting because the camera was placed really at eye level, and because it had a tracking device, like an AI tracking device on it, and because of that, there was a sort of quite an interesting and quite playful interactivity that took place. It felt that there was a real kind of consent given. I'd loosely kind of designed this, the sort of 4 chapters around 4 very particular themes. So the first was around the kind of contents that are usually hidden within the kind of shipping of these materials. Then the second is about the kind of unveiling of the processes. The third is around model collapse and the idea of the image kind of degrading and collapsing as it kind of feeds back into the machine. And finally, the fourth is about how it's all stored. Then you end up knowing something so intimately well because it exists only as an image to begin with. You're then responsible for giving it body or like giving it weight, So then you become its sort of its maker. It's taking photographs throughout the entire length of the exhibition. So it houses a camera, and every minute it will take a photograph. You can also see this really large mirrored wall that it's facing. So it's actually photographing itself, and it's photographing audiences looking at the machine, potentially audiences looking at themselves, looking at the machine. So there are all of these sort of back and forth of looking and seeing and capturing and image making. And by the end of the exhibition, I'll have this quite large body of images that I can then use as a sort of reference point for the exhibition that follows. I wanted the second variation to be this idea of unveiling the machine. And that was already kind of planned even before the first variation took place. But what happened with the first variation in terms of the image data that was produced, the thing that I was kind of not expecting was when I processed all of those images and created a kind of average image from them, because of the nature of that first work, a lot of people were using their phones and cameras and equipment to photograph the work. And so a lot of those images informed the sort of average image that came from it. And what it gave me were these strange images of, mostly men holding these kind of hybrid machines that looked like cameras but also looked like weapons. There was always going to be this kind of aggressive nature to the machine in this particular show, and it feels quite violent, I think, especially with the sound that it will be producing as well. I'm so excited about the way that the image has started to fall apart. It's kind of, it becomes kind of pixelated in real space and in material space. So that kind of degrading of the image that we see on the screen is sort of happening within our sort of material world. And that's something that I wanted to get across and place back into the image. This is like a really kind of particular project, and I've never really worked in this way at all, where it really demands conversation and like kind of criticality in order for it to move forwards. Of course, you could just like kind of plan the exhibitions, and they could even be different chapters, but those chapters are pre-planned and that's it. But the idea of each one really informing the next one, like genuinely informing the next one, is really it's something that actually I don't think one can really do alone. Like, it needs that kind of critical input as well from other people. I suppose what I hope is that it maybe helps to contribute towards a kind of moving on around from the sort of conversation around generative AI and perhaps like photographic representation. The sort of crisis around kind of photographic discourse was about, oh my gosh, but they look so much like photographs and the photographer's job is going to be redundant. And to me, that just felt like such a, that argument didn't feel like the important conversations to be having. So in many ways, I hope this project kind of helps to maybe articulate some of those concerns in different places, to exist in other parts of generative AI rather than sort of solely about their relationship to, say, the job market and photographic representation. At the beginning of the project, I really intended to use the technology far, far more than I am now, because the more I find out and the more I kind of reveal the violence of these tools and the kind of the sort of harmful nature of them, the more of a kind of step back that I want to take from them. Trying to have more of a kind of limited engagement with them, yet still being able to kind of respond critically to them. So it's a really interesting kind of position and balance to be navigating, trying to understand to what extent you push the processes in an understanding of them whilst dealing with the kind of ethical considerations around them. And I think through doing that and enacting it materially and kind of creating those feedback loops in sort of physical, real space, I feel like there's more to reveal about the process.